The Pittsburgh Steelers released their 53-man roster, which only included 5 wide receivers. I think that's a hint at something. We'll talk about that, the defensive front, and the secondary, and all the important points here on their full 53-man roster. Here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this podcast on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, Steelers fans, let's get into the final 53-man roster. You can get the full breakdown or the full listing, everything. We're not going to go through everybody. I'm just going to say the parts that I thought were most interesting. One short-lived, I did think that they were going to keep 4 tight ends. They did, and I think that's a smart move because they need depth at that position. If one guy goes down, it limits what their ability to do with 3 tight end formations and the flexibility they want to use. Connor Hayward being the tight end / fullback on the roster makes a lot of sense. I think that makes sense. But let's talk about the wide receiver position. I think it's really interesting. I thought the Steelers would keep 6 wide receivers, especially with how Des Fitzpatrick played in the preseason and how he helped at the gunner position. I thought that just made a lot of sense. You could put him on special teams, put him as your option there. But they only kept 5. Now, granted, they can. There's a lot of things that can now happen and probably will happen in the coming days before week 1, where the Steelers can pick up other players that other people released, and we'll get to the big name that I'm sure everyone is looking at right now and talking about in Pittsburgh at the moment. But I think that this sign, that them keeping only this 5, I think it's a sign that there is something in the works. And I'm not even sure if it's just a signing of one of these guys out there. Now, the big name that everyone's talking about right now that's popular in Pittsburgh is Noah Brown. He's another one of the many Texans receivers we said was possible. Robert Woods also got released there. But Noah Brown, he's 6'2". He's a big physical outside guy that had made some really big plays for like a 3-week stretch for the Texans last year. Also, didn't have bad stats either. He filled in with 7 starts last year, had 567 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. You take that for what the Steelers want. And again, with his build, he kind of fits that outside mold. He could really, fit there. And he's also an experienced guy. He's 28 years old. Has played 5 years for the Cowboys, last year for the Texans. So if that worked out, that would make sense. And that would make sense. But again, I look at this roster and I see that only 5 wide receivers being kept. And so George Pickens, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller. And there's nothing wrong with those 5. I think that they're, I said Pickens has been, is primed to be, I think, make a really big rise this year and put himself in that, conversation. Is he elite category? I think Van Jefferson is a solid, kind of a 3, can kind of play in the 2 role if necessary. But I think he's going to be a reliable veteran. Calvin Austin, a speedster, but Calvin Austin didn't make a whole lot of plays in the preseason, and so I think there's wonders there. I think Scotty Miller's good at getting separation as a good 4th, 5th option. They're kind of like Austin, just not as fast. But I think the hang up here that has me sitting here, something else is coming down the line, is the fact that Roman Wilson is your only other 5th option there. And Roman Wilson, I still think, can turn into a really good receiver for the Steelers, but he only started partially practicing with the Steelers this week, and he got injured very early in training camp. He missed the entire preseason, and now how Steelers feel about rookies. They want them to kind of get up to speed. They don't want to rush them into action if they don't have to, unless they're super prepared for that. And Roman Wilson is a guy I think that needed the work, and we talked about at the end of OTAs and minicamp. I thought, okay, Roman Wilson's going to be one of those guys that need to show some serious improvement in training camp. And I thought he did, at least in the first, week or so before he got injured. I thought that there were some really good signs. We talked to Zach Azzani, who praised him for the work, that Roman Wilson was able to put in between the end of mini camp and the start of training camp. But again, with him being injured, I mean, and they're still not sure of his health, there has to be another move coming. And the question, I think, is how serious of a move is Omar Khan going to make? Is it going to be simply signing one of these free agents, or is it going to be trading for somebody? And yes, that could include Brandon Ayuk. I don't think it will. But I think that this is part of what we've talked to Matt Williamson about, what we've talked to Alan Saunders, Nick Farabaugh. The Steelers know that they could use some help in the wide receiver room. But how do they get that help? Do they trade away serious draft picks? Do they find a trade partner with a team that doesn't require that they'll maybe be making a trade that doesn't make them give up a ton of capital? This is going to be the tricky question for Omar Khan. And I think right now they're weighing their options of guys who are available, what it would take to sign them there. And, guys like Noah Brown, who were cut, there's going to be teams that are in competition with the Steelers to get guys like that. And so, and he's not the only one that got cut, but you look at the build there and what the Steelers are looking for. It makes sense for them to target a guy like that unless they are saying, no, we're very confident there's going to be a trade that happens here. And again, Brandon Ayuk hasn't signed a new deal with the 49ers, so maybe that's the move. I still think that wouldn't be the right move unless Omar Khan has magically walked down the Niners and waited them out and forced John Lynch to just hand over Ayuk for not even a second-round pick. That would be insane if he pulled it up. I don't think he will. I think that John Lynch and the Niners figure a way to figure that out. But I do think there's something in the works here that isn't just getting a guy. And there's plenty of other guys. There's other gunners, other guys that are bigger wide receivers that are out there that can help on special teams and also be that fourth or fifth option. I don't think that's the only move the Steelers are looking at here. I do think that there is some slider trade that could get another number 2-ish type of receiver on the roster. And again, for low trade compensation. I don't think that they're looking to spend a first, a second, or even really a third unless it's like a really, really good deal in their favor. I think that this is going to be a smaller trade or signing of some sort to kind of give yourself another option. Because again, I think the Steelers, they recognize their offense is going to go through running the ball, play action, spreading the ball around, using one of your 4 tight ends that you kept on the roster between Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, and Michael Pruitt. And it's going to lessen the need for a true powerful, superpower number 2 wide receiver. But having depth at wide receiver is going to be important. And, as we talked about with Alan Saunders on yesterday's episode, if George Pickens goes down, this team is in a whole world of trouble. Now, signing Noah Brown, I don't think stops that from being the case, but I think it gives them at least a temporary reprieve if George Pickens goes out for like a half a game. Like if he's hurt mid-game, you could at least have guys that can fill in those roles and you can kind of work around it temporarily. But that's why I just think when you look at this, I do think that there's something coming down the line. If they had kept Des Fitzpatrick, I would have thought like, okay, maybe they're a little bit more confident with these guys than I thought they were, but they didn't. And now I do think there's a sign that, okay, you wouldn't just keep 5 wide receivers with one rookie being hurt for basically an entire month, going into his rookie season, unless you were looking to add somebody that I think would be more contributing more than what I think Calvin Austin is expected to contribute to this year. So that definitely feels like a hint from Omar Khan. This might become an old thing by like 9 a.m. in the morning if the Steelers go make a move. But either way, I think that's an interesting part of the roster. Another interesting part of the roster is the assembly of defensive front guys and who they kept, because I thought they'd keep a good group of them. I didn't think they'd keep as many of the defensive linemen as they were, but I think there's some interesting messages through that. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Summer's winding down and fall's almost here, which is a great time to see live concerts, football games, and get ready for the MLB playoffs. Game Time has a feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching for those thousands of tickets. One of those deals is a 50% off for Labor Day tickets for Diamondbacks versus Dodgers. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy your tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. One feature I love is the super deal, where it finds you a combination of the best seat for the best price available, whether that's front row at a concert or club seats at the big game. Plus, the game time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less somewhere else, you can Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue looking over the Steelers' 53-man roster and the more interesting parts of it. And we'll get to other parts of it. Again, some of the things that were kind of, regular and expected. 3 quarterbacks. Yeah, said that was going to – we all kind of figured that would happen. 3 running backs, Cordero Patterson being the third, thought that was going to happen. Offensive line, not too many surprises there. Especially with the injury to Nate Herbig, Ryan McCollum being the backup center. We talked about that with Alan Saunders. But I do think it's interesting who they kept on their defensive front. Now, a reminder also, they, we'll get to the secondary in the next segment, but the team did put Cole Holcomb on the temporary IR, so he still has a chance to come back at some point. We'll see how that plays out. But when you look at who they kept at defensive line and linebacker, I think it has some interesting tells for what the Steelers want to do. One, they kept 8 defensive linemen, which I didn't think that of all the things I thought would happen, that's not what I thought would happen. I thought that they would keep 7 and they would figure something out there. I also thought that they would keep an extra actual edge. We talked about maybe a Kyron Johnson there. They didn't. They let him go. It appears what they're going to do is they're going to make DeMarvin Leal, at least for now, their 4th edge rusher on the team, which I don't think that he looked that bad in doing so. In fact, I think he looked kind of good in doing so in the games in the preseason. And again, you're not asking him to go out there and start. You're not asking him to even go out and be the first guy off the bench. You're asking him to be basically the second pair with Nick Herbig, when they're rotating guys in to keep TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith fresh. And I think Leal's shown the ability to at least give that, have a chance to be an impact player in doing that and giving you, backup reps there. And I think that's pretty solid. But again, look at the defensive linemen they kept here. Montravius Adams, Keanu Benton, Cam Hayward, DeMarvin Leal, Logan Lee, Isaiah Loudermilk, Dean Lowry, and Larry Ogunjobi. I wasn't sure about Logan Lee because of injuries and he's a rookie and how that was going to play out. I was very confident about Dean Lowry because he's an experienced veteran. He knows the NFL. He's been in it for quite some time, and they like guys like that can help, especially against the run. So he brings you there. I was a little shaky on Loudermilk, but I do think that Loudermilk played pretty well down the stretch in preseason and showed that, hey, he's grown a little bit in his skills. And the whole reason they drafted him, and we talked about this years ago because this is his 4th season in the NFL. We talked to Carl Dunbar. Carl Dunbar was like, yeah, we drafted him because he's like basically the same size as Cam Hayward, maybe a little bigger. He just needs to get his meanness up and get his strength up, and he'll get there. So, but you look at that, keeping 8 defensive linemen. One of those defensive linemen, I think, DeMarvin Leal, this might be him kind of exclusively being more so an edge guy and lining up on the outside, but using him to move around when they're trying to trick guys. Now, again, let's look at the linebackers to add to that. So we got 8 defensive linemen. You have Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt as the only 3 outside linebackers officially kept on the 53-man roster. Then you have Patrick Queen, Landon Roberts, Peyton Wilson, Tyler Matakevich, and Mark Robinson. I didn't think they'd keep both Matakevich and Robinson. I thought that they would keep one or the other, and I thought Mark Robinson would be the guy, but Matakevich is a special teamer. They need special teamers. I also think Mark Robinson showed he could be a good special teamer, so they keep both. So that I think that's a smart move on their part. Excuse me. But I think one thing that's being set up here is this Steelers team, I think, and I'm going to explore more of this, especially when we start to get the tape from regular season games. I think this Steelers defense could be much closer back to being what Blitzburgh used to represent for the Steelers. Now, Blitzburgh, you've probably seen that. There's also an account name on Twitter for that posts a lot of Steelers content. But it was the old nickname for like the 90s Steelers, and they were just bringing heat. They were just sending it. They were causing chaos, getting in the backfield. Now, the Steelers for a while kind of didn't need the blitz because they had their front four that was just beating everybody. And when you got TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and Cam Hayward and that crew just getting pressure with Ford, Stephon Tuitt was at one point in that mix, you didn't need to necessarily blitz really aggressively. But the way that they are assembling this defensive front suggests to me that they might want to be more aggressive and exotic with where they send their heat from, and not just send, your front four guys and just disguise the coverages behind them. Because when you look at, again, I think they're going to want to find ways to get Nick Herbig on the field. I think that they're going to want a lot more often than he was last year. I think that with DeMarvin Lee Allen there, he's a guy that you could line up on the inside and then they bump outside and do so many different things with. And that's where you're going to want to see creativity from Teryl Austin and this defense. And again, the creativity isn't just Teryl Austin. It's working all the coaches together. Carl Dunbar, who's the really experienced defensive line coach. Aaron Curry, who's the linebacker coach that came in last year and has done a really good job so far. We also know that Patrick Queen, Elandon Roberts, Peyton Wilson, all of them are blitzers. And also, I think that that's something that Tyler Matakevich and Mark Robinson can do. So when you look at this potential here, I think you see an assortment of guys who can be decent to good pass rushers, as well as athletic enough to move around in different spots and keep the alignment shifting. So offensive linemen aren't just keying in on, okay, we know that they're attacking this gap, and this gap on given plays. And I think that could be another line of defense, the pun intended, I guess there. You can Yoshi bonk me for that. But I think that can be another line of defense in the defense's schematics. Whereas in the past, I think Teryl Austin's best work in what he's designed conceptually and for his defense has been how they disguise coverages for the secondary. Like you look and see in some of Minkah Fitzpatrick's best plays when Teryl Austin's been defensive coordinator, it's been how they've disguised him and how they've set him up to just take over a game. How they've disguised, you go back to who was the practice squad safety that intercepted the Bengals, Jake Browning, on the sideline? I forget his name right now. It escapes me, but he was a practice squad safety that came up and they baited. It was a design bait to make Browning think that this quick pass was open underneath, and the safety jumped right on it. It was kind of it was designed to be that, and he was just like, hey, just be in your spot, be ready to make the play, and it happened. I've seen a lot of plays where Teryl Austin designs preset looks to get and that fake, for example, a cover 2 scheme and then switch into a cover 3 or a cover 1 with a man blitz or something like that. And the idea is to get certain matchups that the quarterbacks fall for or certain alignments they fall for and make a mistake where you can create a turnover opportunity. And I think that's something that Teryl Austin will continue to do. And I think he's been pretty good at that. But where I think that needs to be added to this defense is that kind of complexity at the defensive line level. And that was something that Dick LeBeau did very well. That was something that Keith Butler, I think, specialized in. That's something that he was big in. But I think Keith Butler didn't have the secondary experience that Teryl Austin had. And so I think what might be happening here, and again, this is just me theorizing, looking at the 53-man roster and what I've seen early on this season. I think there's going to be a lot more complexity in where blitzes come from, where heat comes from, but also where guys who could be blitzers help in coverage. Because with the athleticism on this defense, I think there's plenty of guys that can do both, and that might allow for the Steelers to try to fool offensive lines into giving up pressure in certain situations, but also fool quarterbacks into making more mistakes. And I think all of that is kind of an exciting or really interesting part of the season to look forward to when it comes to this defense. Again, we're going to continue to evaluate the quarterbacks, the offensive line, everyone on this team moving forward. We've done a lot of that throughout this training camp in the preseason. But this is still a team that's going to win with its defense. And it's not just going to win with its defense, but by lining them up and saying, just TJ Watt, just go be better than the other guy. Even though sometimes that's what you need them to do. It's like, hey, TJ, you got to win this one. Alex, you got to win this one. Minkah, you got to win this one. Those type of matchups are fine. But having schematics where there's organized chaos and doing it so in ways that don't leave your defense completely vulnerable, but also give them more opportunities to make plays on the ball, to be in advantageous situations. That's where it's going to be interesting to see how well do they develop this defense around those guys. And I think the skill set of the defense that they have right now, especially with the addition of guys like Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson to work with Landon Roberts, I think they have the guys over the middle that can help, especially in the trenches, but also a little bit in coverage. And they have the defensive linemen who are comfortable moving from gap to gap, while you have guys like Keanu Benton in A gap taking over, and playing on the nose. Cam Hayward, DeMarvin Leal, Montrevious Adams, Larry Ogunjobi, all those guys I think are guys that can move around and be threats in several different spots. And maybe Leal is primarily on the edge now because of how you only kept 3 outside linebackers. But I do think that this is part of what they're going to be doing, is that this Steelers defense is going to have a lot of moving parts, a lot of guys shifting around and disguising where heat's coming from and where coverage is going. And that could be a really exciting part of what makes this defense truly elite this season, on top of the talent that it has. But speaking of talent, I want to talk about the secondary and what we saw there, because a player going on IR changed how that played out. I want to talk about the Steelers' decisions there and what it means. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue talking about the big talking points I had from the 53-man roster. Now, we've talked about the linebackers, the defensive line, and the wide receivers. Let's talk about the group that I was intentionally leaving for last, and it's the defensive backs, the secondary here, and the safeties and the cornerbacks as a whole. So your total defensive backs that are kept: Beanie Bishop, Deshaun Elliott, Jalen Elliott, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Dante Jackson, DeMonte KZ, Miles Killebrew, Joey Porter Jr., Darius Rush, Cory Trice Jr. Now, the biggest surprise of that group, in my opinion, is Jalen Elliott, but I think that is the direct response to Ryan Watts being out for the season with a really rough shoulder injury. Did not look great when he was on the field and he was hurt. And a shame, because he looked really good in camp, and I thought that he was doing a good job in preseason. So that's unfortunate for the Steelers. But when you look at how their depth chart is set up, Jalen Elliott is more of a safety right now, and he at least gives you depth there. And I think this is another sign of that the Steelers are going to be rotating their safeties a lot this season, with probably a lot of 3 safety sets with Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, and DeMonte KZ. But behind them, Miles Killebrew is your next best option. Miles Killebrew, he can be in the secondary of the safety, but you don't want him being featured too much, and because he's more of your special teams ace. I think that's where Jalen Elliott comes in. He can help give some relief there for if there's one injury to the safety room. It doesn't mean that all the safeties are now kind of exposed. It allows them to have more of a rotation, keep more guys in those spots there. So I think that's that's pretty. I think that's a smart move by the Steelers to keep an extra safety there. And that's why I thought Ryan Watts would stay in that situation. But I also think it's interesting which cornerbacks that they kept, because again, not naming Cam Sutton because he's suspended and that's not needed. But when you're looking at the cornerbacks as they're listed, again, Joey Porter Jr., Dante Jackson, Cory Trice Jr., Darius Rush. Let me just stick with those with those 4, the 4 main outside guys. I really thought both Trice and Rush came on strong. I think it's a very good sign that now Trice is dealing with a groin injury. We'll see how he recovers from that. There's a chance it's not that deep, but we know that groin injuries, as Cam Hayward talked about last year, are things that can nag you all season long if you don't take care of it, if you don't show precaution. So that's where I think that the Steelers might be looking at there. It's like, hey, keep there. But I think it says a lot that their top 2 outside cornerbacks are Trice and Rush. I think that Rush showed some really good plays in the preseason. I thought he had a good camp as well. So on the outside guys, I think that's fine. What I think is really interesting is that Beanie Bishop, who we talked about with Alan Saunders in yesterday's episode, we weren't sure what would happen with the slot cornerback position, especially because of the way they used Thomas Graham in the final preseason game. But it does appear with the way that they assembled this, that basically they were having a competition between Graham and Bishop and who would be able to fit the slot role better. And Bishop was the guy that they chose. And again, Graham's the experienced one. Now, this does not preclude the Steelers from adding in the secondary, just like we're talking about how they're going to try to add at wide receiver. They could still go get somebody, and this can change tomorrow. But that Beanie Bishop is in position as far as this 53-man roster is for him to be the Steelers starting slot corner. I think it speaks volume to their confidence in him that they at least release the roster this way, because if they didn't feel good about Beanie Bishop, they would have found a different way to line that up. And then still, if they were still looking for, shopping afterwards, for a slot corner after final cutdown day, they could do that then. But I think that this alignment shows that, hey, they feel Beanie Bishop's, going to be ready and battle tested for the NFL there. And so when I look at how this group is assembled right now, and again, this could change. Also, Cam Sutton, when he comes back from suspension, what happens there? Who has to go off the roster? Cam Sutton's a guy that can kind of double as a safety and a cornerback who can play around. So maybe that's Jalen Elliott's spot. But ultimately, I do think that this is a Steelers secondary that, again, has the size, has the athleticism, and can make plays on the ball. And it's going to be really interesting to see with the way that these guys line up. We also know that, Trice can line up in the slot if he gets back healthy, and be a big slot that can just be really physical right there, allowing guys for space for guys like Darius Rush to play on the outside. We also know Deshaun Elliott can help in the slot. But you look at all these guys and the ways that they can line up and the athleticism that they bring and the team speed that they bring, especially from a guy like Dante Jackson. I really think that this is a defense that, again, goes back to what I'm talking about with the disguises, the speed, the complexity. All the pieces are there for that to happen on defense. If you were to make me put money down on which would be the first, move the Steelers go get, or the thing that they prioritize right now as far as their next move or next addition to this roster, I would say wide receiver over corner, simply because I think with the way that they kept these guys, it doesn't mean that they don't want to add, but I think that it's going to be on the back burner compared as far as priorities compared to the wide receiver position, where I do think that they need to be a little bit more aggressive. So all that being said, I think, we spent 2 segments talking about the defense. I think that the Steelers are pretty happy with who they got to keep on defense. There wasn't a whole lot of drama to it. I think that was that's another part of this is this was kind of just, there wasn't a whole lot of surprises with this list. But I do think that with the Steelers' current positioning allows them to be more flexible on defense, and that flexibility could help really well with production, with concepts, and with confusing opposing offenses, which is really what this team needs to do. If the Steelers become a takeaway turnover creating team that's up there on the top of this year, at the top of the NFL, look out, because I think that puts them right in the conversation with being one of the better NFL teams, so long as the offense also takes steps up as well. But we still have plenty more to go over this week. This was your Wednesday episode on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. We're going to try to have our guy, Wes Euler from Steeler Nation Radio, back on the show tomorrow. We wanted to have him today, but technicalities got in the way. We're going to try to have him back tomorrow. If you're excited for Wes, let me know by hitting me up on Twitter with at Carter Critiques there, and hit up Wes because he's the man too. But anyways, we'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.